Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Patreon podcast. This week I wanted to talk about something that's very prevalent in my month, and that is the idea of crunch, and basically sitting down and forcing yourself to work and to do things to meet a deadline. Crunch is always kind of a big, contentious topic in the game development world, especially for larger companies that force employees to work for long hours and all this other stuff. And I don't want to get into that. I want to get into the idea of you doing this for yourself as a creator. And I mean, like I said, it's very prevalent for me right now because I have been doing the album in a month, and I am recording this about 20 hours before this episode goes live because I have no backlog anymore because I've been focused on other things. And I am thankful that the album that I'm working on is very low key, but just the fact that I am doing an album in a month takes a lot of mental bandwidth, and sometimes I just am not able to get things done as quickly as I usually do. But in this case, I feel that working in crunch is a lot like working for exposure. And what I mean by that is, as long as you're doing it on your own terms, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Where you know that you need to finish something and you just need to sit down and actually do the work. And sometimes that requires a little bit of sacrifice in other parts of your life. But as long as you're being mindful and aware of what those parts are, and as long as you're not prolonging the crunch period to a really long period of time, it's not really a bad thing. It's a way that you are able to just buckle down and get something done. And of course, ideally, it would be best if you never had to do any kind of crunch or you never had to do work for exposure or anything like that. But that's not really the real world. Like, things happen. Or in my case, like I set the album in a month thing. I have a hard deadline that I need to do, but I also need to fulfill all of these other obligations with like the podcast and with my day job and everything else. So I have to be mindful and aware of all of that. And it's a little bit of a crunch for me, but that's not a bad thing, because I went into this month knowing that it will be a crunch, and I have the planning set up. So this album that I'm working on is very low impact, like I said. So I'm essentially just kind of working on that album when I can, and it's coming together very well. I'm very excited to share it in a week or two. And I'm keeping my mental load very, I want to say low, but minimal is probably a little bit more reasonable there. But yeah, I'm just trying very hard to keep things managed. But it still feels like crunch time for me because there are just a lot of things going on. I guess this is a bit of a shorter one, isn't it? But I just wanted to talk about it a little bit. And I think that the crux of this whole thing is, if you're doing crunch, do it on your terms and go into it knowing what you're getting yourself into. When I was working on Color Jumper back in 2017, when I was finishing that up, I was in super hardcore crunch mode for a very long period of time, and there was no real end to that either. Whereas just like I needed to work on the game and I needed to finish the game, but I didn't really have any end points in mind as to when the game was done. So I ended up just working on it and working on it and working on it, and I didn't really stop the crunch, the just like the intense focus on it for probably 6 months. And that was really detrimental to not only my like physical health, but my mental health. Like I dealt with a lot of depression. I had a lot of issues during that time. And this was also while I was doing 2-hour track challenges. I also wrote the Visual Out soundtrack. Like, I had other projects going on concurrently with that. And it's just like every day I was either at work or I was working, you know, and that was a real problem for me. And I honestly feel like I'm still recovering from that to some degree, simply because like there was just so much work that had to be done. It just exhausted me. And getting through the rest of this backlog, like I wanted to do in 2020, this was really kind of a cleanse for me that allowed me to hit the reset button and start over and not have to worry about this kind of crunch anymore. And I feel like I'm getting there. And I feel like when I am doing crunch time, when I am going and buckling down and focusing, I can do it in better prolonged bursts rather than just being like, I need to work on this and I don't know when I need to stop working on this. Doing timed challenges is great. I love the album in a month challenge because it gives me a hard deadline and a hard goal to reach for. And I mean, unlike working in a corporate environment, you don't really have to meet the deadlines. Like, it's good. It's good to have a goal. And if you don't, if in the album in a month challenge, or if you do a 2-hour track challenge, it's like, if you don't do it, if you don't get the deadline, you're just like, nah, whatever. It's a little different in a corporate environment, but we're talking about your own personal projects and your creative projects. And at some point you need to be a professional about this stuff. But, yeah, I'm kind of talking like about 3 things at once. And really the whole point is that it's just something that you need to be aware of. And when you do crunch time, you need to like throw yourself at it. Like, for sure. You don't want to half-ass something like that, because you are investing a lot of mental and physical energy into getting it done. So you should just get it done. For better or worse, like, it's real hard. But of course there's caveats to that. You want to make sure that you have, your own mental health in mind. That mental health always comes first. And if you are burning out, you need to stop. So it's like, it's full of conflictions, I guess. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It's like, it's really something that you need to figure out for yourself. But it's also something that has to happen. Like, there's no way to completely avoid crunch. It's just sometimes things pile up, especially when it comes to release time, where it's just like, there's things that you can't do until the thing is almost released. And then there's a lot of things that you have to do all at the same time, like releasing a game, releasing an album, releasing any kind of major piece of artwork, I think requires crunch. But as long as that crunch is approached with mindfulness, that's really kind of the most important piece, where you're approaching this obstacle with the idea that it can be overcome, but it is going to require a little bit more work. There we go. We got there. Well, after running in circles for 4 or 5 minutes, we finally figured it out. So yeah, it's about being mindful and being aware of what's coming up, and then attacking it with all that you have, and just make sure that you don't burn yourself out. So yeah, kind of a weird one, but it's one that's really on my mind right now, because I need to finish the album and I need to make sure that I have a backlog for these podcasts and everything else. But that's my problem. And I just need to be a little bit more mindful of my own work. I need to listen to my own advice, which is something I don't do as often as I should. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for being a Patreon supporter. I really genuinely do appreciate it a lot. And I hope you have a good weekend and a good rest of the week. And I'll talk to you next time. Be remarkable.